In our previous video, we looked at the subject of Constantine, and we responded to the claim that Constantine actually created the person called Jesus, and then commissioned Michelangelo to make a figure of this person called Jesus so that people would worship physicality. And so I gave all my reasons why this theory is not true, because if you take into account all the evidence, the earliest sources and writings about Jesus prove to us that it is impossible for Constantine to have invented or created the person Jesus, because there are people who wrote about Jesus hundreds of years before Constantine came into the scene. It also disproved the notion that the Council of Nicaea created this person called Jesus. And if you haven't watched that video, we've put it in the description box for you to look at. Now, in this video, we're going to be looking at the claim that was made by Mkhulu Nsingiza that the sun is the creator on earth. It's the only creator on earth. And so he gives a few reasons why he thinks the sun is the creator. So I'm going to give you 3 reasons why the sun cannot be the creator. But before we get into that video, a few housekeeping announcements is we've created a channel for people who might be looking at our videos and going, I like what I'm hearing and I'm learning new things, but I want to hear more. And so we've created actually a separate channel that is designed for you to get more knowledge. The videos are much longer on that channel. And we also interview prominent scholars around South Africa. And so you can tap into all of that knowledge that doesn't just come from me, but from other scholars around South Africa as well. For example, we made a video recently interviewing Professor Piff Pereira, who is a professor of theology at the Baptist Theological College, and he had recently celebrated 20 years of ministry in theological education. And so we looked at the question of how was the name Jesus translated from Yeshua to Jesus and to Jesus, or Yesu or Jesu, or all the languages of the world. And so if you're interested in those sort of topics, and if you're interested for more knowledge, I would encourage you to subscribe to that channel, follow what we're doing there, and it'll help you better understand the arguments that we are putting out in this channel as well. So let's get into our video for today, and then I'm going to give my response after.
By failing to understand the connection, which is very important. Remember, Guti, Abelungu, they operate from what is called a closed system, where everything here, but it's mechanical. Meaning, Guti, Umlungu doesn't believe emoyeni. You know, Umlungu believes on everything that has manifested already. So, Momchelang causal plane, Uguti, what has created the apple? Akekho interested ukuthi what principles were involved in creating the physical apple. So okhokho bethu were masters in that. And that is what Abelung called the metaphysical. Abelung are just interested in the physical. We are more interested in the metaphysical. Siyayibona le apple. But we are not interested because we can see it. We are interested in what created, what principles were involved in the creation of that, apple. So, abelungu ke misinterpreted yonke lento le, meaning ukuthi this, spiritual canon said, bona they twisted it for social control, so that they are able ukuthi ba control abantu and replace in nature with a physicality. Umlungu can never equate, they can never equate themselves nelanga. The only creator on earth is the sun. Let me tell you, Ganjan. I said to you, the sun burns, carbon to create hydrogen. When DNA yako is bonded by the same hydrogen. So as long as the sun is there, we are pila. Do you understand? So, and as long as the sun is there and the moon, there's life on earth. Ilwane, yonke lendole. Because of that.
There isn't a single people group or nation that has never venerated the sun. In ancient Roman pagan religion, they called him Sol Invictus, which was the deity that was associated with the sun. In fact, Constantine continued to venerate the sun even when he had accepted Christianity as a religion. The Greeks called him Apollo. In Hinduism, his name is Surya. In ancient Persia, he's called Mithras. And in ancient Egypt, he is called Ra, which is the god that is associated with creation and associated with the sun, which is the deity that I think Mkhulu Nsingiza is talking about here, because he is a believer in ancient Egyptian beliefs. Now, it's very easy to see why people would want to associate the sun with God or seeing the sun as divine in some form of way. It's because the sun is the single most important thing to us here on earth. In ancient times, it used to help people determine the times, the seasons. Their calendars were literally based on the sun. It was the sun that helped them determine what was happening or what they were supposed to do. The sun is so important to us because it gives us light, it gives us sunshine. And when it's cold like this, I mean, you might be tempted to appreciate the sun a lot more than you're supposed to. And the sun is also important for our food. It helps us to grow our vegetables and so on. And so it's easy to understand why people would want to associate the sun with creation or some form of divinity. The great African philosopher John Mbiti once said, Africans are notoriously religious. And what he meant was that Africans have an aspiration to connect with the divine. Africans don't only want to engage the physical or material world, but they also want to connect with the supernatural world. And so Mkhulu Nsingiza is quite accurate when he says that we are interested not only in the apple, but also in how that apple came to being. What created the apple? How did we get the apple? And so he's quite right when he says that. But the problem is that immediately after he says that, he goes against that aspiration of the African to say that the sun is the creator and that the sun actually is not part of the physical world, that somehow the sun is supernatural, whereas the apple is physical. But the problem is the sun is as physical as the apple. We can see the sun, we can feel the sun. You know, we can see the sunlight. It's a part of our physical world. It's part of nature. And nature is actually a part of our physical material world. And you'll often hear people from the Great Empire of Kemet saying that we want to connect people to nature.
Sesihamba nge-nature because African spirituality is nature-centered. Imvelo incane nonomkhubulwane.
And this is somehow spiritual. And so he goes immediately against the aspiration of the African to connect with the divine. So that's my first objection to the sun being the creator, is that the sun is a part of our physical world, and therefore it cannot be the creator. It doesn't fulfill the aspiration of the African to know the creator, to know the one that's behind the sun, the one that's behind the apple. This is why Abraham is held in such high esteem in Christianity and in Judaism, and even in Islam. It's because Abraham saw the sun, he saw the moon, but he wanted to know the one that is beyond the sun, the one that's beyond the moon. He was somebody who could see the sun being an important part of life, but actually he was so curious to know the one that created the sun and the moon. My second objection to the sun being the creator is, what about the different billions of stars that are out there in the universe? What about them? Are they also creators? Or maybe they could make the argument that no, the sun is the creator only here on earth. But you still have a problem because you haven't accounted for the universe. Who created the universe? Is this a different person? You know, is it just one creator that created the earth and then there's a different creator? And who is that person? Who created the universe? And so you still have given us a worldview that doesn't account for the big universe that we have, but actually you've only tried to account for only a small part. And so the aspiration of the African is not just to know who created here on earth, but we want to know who created the universe. How did we get here? The metaphysical questions are still not answered if we're saying the sun is the creator. My third objection to the notion that the sun is the creator is that it fails to take into account the scientific evidence that has been put before us today. For an example, we know from the Big Bang theory that the universe has a beginning. And if the universe has a beginning, the sun has a beginning. And everything that has a beginning has a cause. And so we have to ask ourselves, if the universe began to exist, if the sun began to exist, therefore we must ask ourselves, what created the sun? And so this notion fails to take into account the modern scientific evidence that is before us. And we can understand why ancient people would believe that the sun is the creator, because they didn't have the technology that we have. But we have to understand that our understanding of the universe improves every single day. Our understanding of who God is also improves every day. And so we must always take into account the latest revelations in science, but also in the philosophy of religion, or of understanding who God is, but it also relates to how we understand the universe. But in Genesis chapter 1, we're told that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so this, for me, helps the African to understand that it was God that created the heavens and the earth. In other words, the sun and the moon and everything that's on earth, these are not gods, these are not deities, these are not things that we're meant to worship, but actually these are things that have been created by God. And these are things that God had designed for us to look at these things and to begin to search and seek for the Creator. And when we look at the sun, we can see that this is a gift from God. It's a gift that shows us that there is a Creator, but it's not something for us to worship. And that's what Paul speaks about in Romans chapter 1, when he says they chose to worship created things rather than the Creator. They chose to worship the gift rather than the giver of the gift. And so the Genesis view of creation for me is a much better view. It's a view that better fulfills the aspiration of the African to know the Creator. Because if you look at Genesis chapter 3, it also tells us that the sun and the moon are actually have been put by God as servants. They are there to serve us, to give us light, to give us food, to give us everything that we will need in the earth. And so our response should be then to say, thank you, Lord, for the sun. It's to say, Lord, thank you that you created the sun so that we can have light, we can have heat when it's cold. And so for me, this version of African spirituality, I completely reject. Because if you're calling me to worship the sun, I cannot worship the sun, because the sun is a part of the physical world. We know the sun is created if it's in the physical world, and therefore I cannot worship the sun. But secondly, if you're saying I must worship the sun, what about the billions of stars that are out there? You know, did they also create? And if you're just saying the sun only created the world that we're in, then you fail to account for who created the universe. Because if God exists, he is the creator of the universe. He's not just the creator of the earth. So I'm not just interested in who created, who's the God of Africa. I'm not looking for, and a lot of people like to hide behind the fact that it's African spirituality, but all the people of the world have venerated the sun. And so we cannot hide behind African spirituality, but we have to see this as a global view of God. But it's not a complete view of God, because thirdly, it fails to take into account scientific evidence that is before us that tells us that the sun has a beginning, that the universe has a beginning. And if the universe has a beginning, if the sun has a beginning, then it must have a cause. And so the aspiration of the African is still, who created the sun? You still have not answered that question, because the creator is uncreated. And so for me, the biblical view, the biblical understanding of creation better fulfills the aspiration of the African.